Some prison breaks end at the nearest fence. One became one of the boldest escape attempts in military history. Deep inside Nazi Germany, behind barbed wire and armed guards, hundreds of Allied prisoners quietly prepared to vanish. For more than a year, they dug beneath the earth. They forged documents. They built civilian clothes. And they planned an escape so ambitious that it would forever be known simply as the Great Escape. During the Second World War, thousands of Allied airmen were shot down over occupied Europe and captured by German forces. Officers were usually sent to special prisoner of war camps where they were expected to remain until the war ended. One of those camps was Stalag Luft III, built near the town of Sagan, in what was then Germany and is now part of Poland. The camp was unlike most prisons. It had been designed specifically to prevent escapes. The barracks stood raised above the ground, so guards could easily spot any tunnel entrances hidden beneath them. Sensitive microphones were buried underground to detect the sound of digging. The sandy yellow soil beneath the camp was difficult to hide because it looked completely different from the darker surface soil. The Germans believed they had created an escape-proof prison. They were wrong. Among the prisoners was a Royal Air Force squadron leader named Roger Bushell, known by the nickname Big X. Bushell had escaped before, been recaptured before, and refused to believe any prison camp was impossible to break out of. He had a much bigger idea than simply helping a few men escape. His goal was to create chaos. If enough prisoners disappeared at once, Germany would be forced to divert thousands of soldiers and police officers to hunt them down instead of sending those men to the front lines. It was an act of resistance as much as an attempt to gain freedom. Bushell gathered trusted prisoners and revealed an extraordinary plan. Not one tunnel, 3. They would be called Tom, Dick, and Harry. If one was discovered, work on the others could continue. The operation became one of the largest secret engineering projects ever carried out inside a prisoner of war camp. Almost everyone had a role. Some dug, some acted as lookouts, others forged identity papers, maps, and travel permits. Tailors secretly transformed old blankets and uniforms into civilian clothing. Artists copied official German stamps by hand. Every detail had to look authentic. The tunnels themselves presented enormous challenges. The sandy soil constantly threatened to collapse. To prevent this, the prisoners dismantled hundreds of wooden bedboards and used them to reinforce the tunnel walls. The tunnels were barely large enough for one man to crawl through. They stretched deep below the ground to avoid German listening devices. Air was another problem. Without fresh oxygen, the diggers would quickly suffocate. So the prisoners built an improvised ventilation system using discarded food tins, pieces of wood, and homemade pumps. They even installed electric lighting by secretly connecting wires to the camp's power supply. The engineering was astonishing, especially considering almost every tool had been made from stolen or recycled materials. Hiding the excavated sand proved just as difficult. Every handful removed from the tunnels had to disappear without attracting attention. The prisoners designed small bags that hung inside their trousers. As they walked around the camp during exercise periods, they quietly released small amounts of sand onto the ground. Others scattered sand in gardens or hid it beneath buildings. Nothing could be wasted. Everything had to remain invisible. The Germans occasionally searched the barracks without warning. Whenever guards approached, work stopped instantly. Tools disappeared beneath floorboards. Tunnel entrances were carefully concealed. Every prisoner knew that one mistake could destroy months of work. Then disaster struck. One of the tunnels, Tom, was discovered before it was completed. Months of dangerous work vanished overnight. For many people, that would have ended the project. Instead, Bushell ordered everyone to focus on the remaining tunnels. Dick was eventually used as a storage space after new buildings blocked its planned exit. That left only one possibility: Harry. For months, work continued in complete secrecy. The prisoners dug deeper and farther beneath the camp. By early 1944, Harry was finally nearing completion. The escape was scheduled for the night of March 24, 1944. 200 men had been selected. Each carried forged papers, civilian clothing, food, and whatever money the prisoners had managed to produce for the journey. Their destinations varied. Some hoped to reach neutral Sweden. Others planned to travel through Germany by train before crossing into Switzerland. A few intended to head south toward occupied France. Each route depended on luck. As darkness fell, the first men climbed into the tunnel. But almost immediately, another problem appeared. The tunnel had ended a little short of the nearby forest. Instead of emerging beneath the trees, the exit opened into open ground where guards could potentially spot anyone crawling out. The escape suddenly became far more dangerous. Each man had to wait for darkness and the right moment before running toward the cover of the forest. That slowed everything down. The narrow tunnel also created delays. Prisoners crawled through it one at a time. Moving even a short distance took several minutes. The carefully planned schedule began falling apart. Despite the setbacks, men continued emerging from the tunnel throughout the night. Some quietly disappeared into the darkness. Others reached nearby railway stations and blended into civilian crowds. For a few hours, the impossible seemed to be happening. Then, just before dawn, disaster struck again. A guard noticed movement near the tunnel exit. The alarm was raised. The escape was over. By then, 76 prisoners had successfully left the camp. More than 100 others were still waiting for their turn. They would never get the chance. German soldiers quickly sealed the tunnel and launched one of the largest manhunts of the Second World War. Roadblocks appeared across the country. Railway stations were searched. Police officers, soldiers, and local officials received descriptions of the escaped prisoners. The hunt stretched across Germany and occupied Europe. For a brief time, a handful of escapees managed to stay ahead. Some traveled hundreds of kilometers by train. Others walked through forests, crossed rivers, or hid in barns and abandoned buildings. Several reached international borders before being stopped. Only 3 men ultimately reached freedom. 2 Norwegian pilots, Per Bergsland and Jens Muller, escaped through occupied Europe before reaching neutral Sweden. A Dutch pilot, Bram van der Stok, traveled through Belgium and France, eventually reaching Spain and then returning to Britain. The remaining 73 escapees were recaptured. What happened next shocked even experienced military officers. Adolf Hitler reportedly became furious when he learned about the mass escape. At first, he is said to have demanded that every recaptured prisoner be executed. Senior German officials argued that such an action would violate international agreements governing prisoners of war. The final order was still brutal. 50 recaptured officers were taken away in small groups under the false claim that they were being returned to prison camps. Instead, they were murdered by the Gestapo. The killings were carefully disguised as prisoners supposedly being shot while trying to escape again. Few believed the explanation. News of the executions eventually reached Britain. The outrage was immediate. The Allied governments promised that those responsible would be brought to justice after the war. When Germany surrendered in 1945, investigators began searching for the men who had organized the murders. Using captured documents, witness statements, and painstaking detective work, investigators tracked down many of those involved. Several former Gestapo officers were arrested, tried and convicted for their roles in the killings. Justice came slowly, but it came. Stalag Luft III itself was eventually liberated as Allied forces advanced into Germany during the final months of the war. Many of the prisoners who had remained behind survived to return home. The Great Escape became famous around the world, inspiring books, documentaries, and films. Some later adaptations changed details for dramatic effect, but the real story was already extraordinary. It was never simply about escaping. Most of the men understood that reaching home would be incredibly difficult. The real objective was to force Germany to spend valuable time, manpower, and resources searching for escaped prisoners instead of fighting the war. In that respect, the operation achieved far more than the number of successful escapes might suggest. It demonstrated remarkable courage, patience, and cooperation under impossible conditions. More than 80 years later, the tunnels are gone. The camp has long since disappeared. But the determination of the men who spent months digging beneath the earth with homemade tools continues to be remembered as one of the greatest prison escape attempts in history. Sometimes the most extraordinary victories are not measured by how many people get away. They are measured by the courage to try, even when the odds say you cannot. Subscribe for more incredible true stories that history almost forgot. And don't forget to like, comment, and share this story.